Welcome to Life But a Page. Today we're thrilled to host Nicole Engelbrecht, the host of True Crime South Africa. Nicole's podcast has captivated listeners with its in-depth storytelling and heartfelt coverage of South Africa's gripping cases. But beyond being a true crime enthusiast, Nicole is also an inspiring entrepreneur. After spending significant years in the corporate world, she made the courageous leap to pursue her passion full-time, a move that's resonated with so many who dream of doing the same. Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
Nicole, reflecting on your bold transition from, a stable corporate career to launching True Crime South Africa podcast. There's a book I like to, it's by Gardner, the author. Do you identify with the hypomanic traits the author describes? It's such as heightened energy and a propensity for risk taking. How would these characteristics influence your entrepreneurial journey?
So I think in terms of risk taking, for much of my life, I would not have identified with risk taking. I would have identified myself as a very sort of conservative person who went with the flow and was very scared of change and all of those sorts of things. But I think that as I got older, I started to understand that sometimes a calculated risk needed to be taken. And I think I'm certainly grateful that I took the risks that I did. In terms of hypermanic, I think that I'm a bit of a work junkie.
Sure.
I enjoy my work, and I'm very hardworking. And I think I'm very dedicated I don't like failing. And I think that's what drives me a lot is, it's really an internal thing. It's not really about what other people think. For me, it's more about making sure that I've achieved what I set out to achieve as well as I can.
Yeah, so your episodes are known for thorough research and empathy, storytelling, obviously. Could you walk us through your process of researching and crafting each story in your, podcast?
Thank you. Yes. So I think the reason that I started True Crime South Africa, and really, when I left my job, I had no idea True Crime South Africa was going to become what it did. But when I decided to start the podcast, my main reason for doing so was because I saw so many victims of South African violent crime not getting a voice, and that was, the I guess that leads into the empathy side of it. Is one of the main reasons that I wanted to start the podcast was to give these victims a voice and hopefully achieve some sort of platform for them and for these cases that are often just cast to the side. So, when I go about preparing these episodes, for me, it's really about, I always go back to one question. Does this serve the victims? Because there are many cases that are high profile that will get lots of clicks that I can cover, but me covering them doesn't really serve the victims. So that's one of the places that I need to start when I decide which cases to cover firstly, and then also how to cover them. So from a victim focused perspective.
Sure. I mean, you deal with a lot of what you call like criminal serial killers, in your stories. And I was just reading this great book called Inheritance. It argues that genes influence how we respond to our environment. Like, do you think like there's evidence that suggests that some criminals like are predisposed to violence or defiance because of their DNA?
Yeah, so there's an ongoing question within sort of the criminology community, which is it nature or is it nurture? So is a violent person born that way, or are
Sure.
they made that way
And
by
then
their
it might be-
family, yeah, by their DNA, by what they experience? And no one's ever really been able to answer that question. But my answer to that question is it's both. and an X factor that often can't be explained. So in South Africa, for instance, what I've come to realize is that many of our violent criminals do come from socioeconomic backgrounds that are difficult. They may have been born in poverty. They may have experienced different types of abuse. And that does not excuse the actions that they take further on in life. And it doesn't mean that everyone born in those circumstances will go on to be a violent person. But there are those commonalities often in some of these individuals that their backgrounds are quite difficult. And I think really what I've come, but then again, on the other side, there are many people who are very privileged who also end up committing very violent crimes. And that's where that X factor comes in. It really comes into how you as a person are equipped, firstly with emotionally, the tools that you're given by your family of origin, and then also just your character, how you're able to deal with those situations. It really is the outcome of whether you end up being a person who commits violent crime or not.
It's such a great story you have, like leaping from, after significant amount of years in the corporate world to like deciding to, venture in this, podcasting journey. I mean, congrats on your show with its success. It's such a pleasure to see such South Africans doing, the amount of work that they're doing to, show that the flag is still raised, in the way it is. So my question is, in your journey, like, what were the what were the challenges that you faced, and what advice would you share to, any aspiring entrepreneurs, about the work that they should be starting, about what they do, but what books do you read books, and stuff like that? Is there such credible or great uh, thing that they should be starting now, or what advice do you have for any aspiring entrepreneur? That's just a basic question that I have.
Sure. I think, I can only reflect on the lessons that I've learned by looking back at my journey. And for me, even though I am no longer in corporate management and I'm no longer in that field, I do see, looking back, how important that was to my success now. I've said to many people, I think that the sort of skyrocketing success of True Crime South Africa also led to a lot of people sort of trying to take advantage of me, and around that. And if I hadn't had my grounding firstly in corporate and understanding how to do business and have a little bit of background in that at least, I very likely would have been taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first part. Is I made this change quite relatively late in life. I was 38 years old when I left my corporate career. And, I don't regret the way it happened, because I don't think that if I got into this in my 20s, I would have had, firstly, the emotional capacity to do what I do. Or perhaps the business knowledge to, like I said, not be taken advantage of by people with nefarious intentions. But also just to do this in a sort of a way that it continues to grow and understand business and that sort of thing. But I really think, for aspiring entrepreneurs, if you can find something that you are incredibly passionate about, that you feel makes some kind of difference in the world, you're never going to feel like you're going to work. Because, I honestly haven't stopped working for the last 5 years. I rarely take breaks. And I haven't yet burnt out. And yes, that's not necessarily healthy, but it's because my work fuels me. It doesn't take energy from me. So I think for, any entrepreneur or person wanting to go into a creative field like podcasting or writing books, if you're going into it because you want to be famous or you want to be rich, there's a very good chance you're not going to be successful, because the long term, um, the hard work and the years that it takes to actually get to the stage where you see some success is going to be very difficult for someone to do if their reason for going into it was wanting immediate success and money and all of these things, you know. So really my lesson, my sort of warning would be to pick something that you really are passionate about. So it doesn't ever feel like you wake up. I don't wake up on Monday morning anymore and go, oh, it's on Monday again. I actually often don't even know what day of the week it is and I don't like wish my weeks away for Friday anymore because I really, really just love what I do.
So beyond the podcast, do you have plans to expand like into other ventures, whether it's public speaking or video content?
So I've been very, very lucky through the podcast to have been given quite a few different opportunities. I have always been a hobby writer. I used to write fiction in my 20s just as a hobby. And through the podcast, I was actually given the opportunity to start publishing books. So I've just recently co-authored my third book. So that's another great line of opportunities that's come from the podcast that I'm definitely continuing with. It's all true crime books. And then, I've been invited onto a couple of documentaries, which has been very cool. I am a fan of video for myself. But when I do the documentaries, it's always fun. It's done with professionals. I think my plans going forward for myself would definitely be to carry on writing the books, continue expanding the podcast because it's really doing. So I really think for me, I'm going to continue on with the books, expanding the podcast because it's doing really amazing real world things. It's bringing in new leads on cases and helping in missing persons cases, which is fantastic. And then I do love audio storytelling. So I'd love to expand in that and also to help expand, help other people start their own true crime podcasts, which will have, people who have different lived experiences from me can bring something new to the true crime field in South Africa. So yeah, I think all of those things are my future plans.
That's great. Your audience is incredibly engaged. Have there been moments where listener feedback or interaction has surprised or touched you along your work?
Absolutely. I think I've been overwhelmed by the community that has been built around True Crime South Africa. And I always say that the listeners of the podcast are the main reason that I get to do all this cool stuff. Their support has really just taken the podcast to new levels. I think the elements that always touch me is when people reach out to say that an episode or something that I've said or a victim story has meant something to them personally. So, there's a lot of occasions where people are listening and they've experienced something similar in their lives. And it helps them to hear someone else's story. And then also when I talk about the education side of things around South Africa's legal system, so I did an episode on consent and on sexual assault where I spoke about some of the definitions of consent, of what sexual assault is in South African law. And that episode really touched a lot of people and, actually ended up with a few people emailing me and saying, I realized that what happened to me is legally defined as rape. And for these survivors, that is a major thing. That's so all of those elements where I often feel like I'm speaking into a void and, it's like no one's listening. But when I get that feedback and I understand that what I'm doing, all the late hours and the hard research is really actually changing people's lives, there's nothing that can replace that.
Now, in closing off, as a final reflection on this show, if there's one thing you want your audience to take away from, listening to True Crime South Africa, what would it be?
I think always that we need to, when we are consuming these stories in any way, whether it's through mass media, through true crime content, we need to center the victims, because for a long time that has not been done. We focused far too much on the perpetrators and our sort of morbid interest around their psychology and their background. And I would really just want South Africans to center the victims far more in the way they engage with this type of content, and especially on social media. Because that's
Mhm.
obviously where a lot of people are gathering there and speaking about these cases, not just on my platforms, but all over. And to just really think about what you're putting out there and how it might impact the victims and their families.
Thank you for joining us on the show. We thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you on next episode in the future. Thank you so much.
Awesome. That's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.